There we go. We did it.
Yeah. I love Twitch and all of the various tech things that you have to do to make it work. And
Right?
even then, sometimes it just doesn't work. And you're like, why? And you have no idea. And that's just life.
Well,
Um,
Nathan Grayson, reporter and co-founder of Aftermath. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited to be on your show. Uh, have been a fan ever since you started, really. It's been really neat to see you kind of develop your own community and everything. Because, like, I knew you before you were a Twitch streamer.
It's
I knew
true.
you back in the day.
We played D&D together.
Yeah, for like what was it, sessions or four? It was somewhere in that neighborhood.
I think we had a good adventure.
Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed it tremendously. It was just one of those classic D&D circumstances where people were like, "Ah, we got to reschedule this session. Oh, let's reschedule that one." And then it was like, "Well, I guess we're going to play in like a month." And then eventually it was like, I
Y-
think this is kind of
yeah, it
over.
just kind of fell apart. But I think you played a druid who was raised by sand gators.
Yeah.
I think I really enjoyed your character. Um, but also you wrote a book.
I did.
You wrote a book.
In the time, yeah. Actually, as soon as we quit playing D&D, I was like, now I finally have time to write a book. Thank God.
Yeah, it's been something like I'm so happy for you that this has finally come out because I've also just periodically seen you like struggling and working on it for years, and now it's finally out. It's so exciting.
Yeah, yeah. So it's called Stream Big: The Triumphs and Turmoils of Twitch and the Stars Behind the Screen. Came out yesterday, which is wild that it's actually out and people can read it because I started working on it uh, sort of like 5 years ago. And that's when I got the book deal. And then I wanted to sort of talk to all of the main people in the book, all the like main streamers. Each chapter is about a different streamer. I wanted to talk to them in person because I really wanted to like do a proper behind the scenes thing, not just like a series of phone calls. Because at that point, why not just write some articles? Um, and then got the book at the end of, or got the deal at the end of 2019, and then 2020 happened,
Yeah.
and that was the pandemic. And so then it was just sort of like, well, can't do that anymore. And so I had to wait and wait and wait. And I had to like tell the publisher, hey, I want to delay this. I'm sorry, which is nerve wracking when you're a first time author. You're like, are they going to take all their money back? Are they going to drop me? Are they going to, fortunately they were accommodating, which makes sense. It was a unprecedented global pandemic. But yeah, that meant that doing the bulk of this was impossible until like 2022 and 2023. But yeah, so I've been, this has been in the works in some capacity for ages. It's finally out. Thank God.
Well, congratulations. I just got this yesterday. So I've been able to read most of it and skim all of it. And so
Man, that's impressive.
I found like a lot of really it's interesting because uh, for example, one of the first parts of the book really dives into the story of DJ Wheat.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm not sure that many people outside of the niche of like esports necessarily know who he is. And like I remember back 15 years ago doing like an email interview with him. And like his interactions with me were just as like forthright and like
Mhm.
decent as they are with you in your book. And it's just kind of nice where it's like, "Oh, that guy's doing well." It's nice that this guy seems like things have worked out. And it from your story that was not necessarily the like ever guaranteed for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's also just like, it's good that he's maintained kind of the same philosophy over the years. He was a very early Twitch employee. Basically, he started out as somebody in kind of, as you were saying, the esports scene, and was one of the first advocates for really like, at least in North America, for like getting it on TV and treating it seriously. as an actual potential sport. And so he was like on early broadcast television around esports and things like that. And then he ended up becoming a Twitch streamer, then eventually a Twitch employee. And he's always been somebody who really like, you know, carried a torch for the community. He's always been like, yeah, the community is what matters most. And I'm going to advocate for them, both from within the company and without. And that carried weight for a long time. Like he was able to accomplish a lot. And then Twitch, changed and changed and changed some more. And eventually just it reached a point where, I think that he felt like he couldn't really um, do the same sorts of things that he had been wanting to do for a long time. And so he left at the beginning of 2021, I believe. But yeah, he like never stopped being that guy because I think it would be, somewhat easy to, especially at a company like Twitch, which got bought by Amazon and sort of slowly but surely transformed from its own thing into an Amazon subsidiary. And I think it'd be easy to sort of just say, to just go along with that, to be like, yeah, sure, my paycheck keeps getting better. Um, these people are telling me to do this and that. Maybe I had all this energy for being a community advocate back then, but I'm older and kind of tired now, so whatever. But he never sold out on his ideals. He was always like the guy who was banging that drum, and so now he's off doing something similar for another company. It's cool to see. He's a good dude.
Yeah, and one of the things that I found fascinating about that part of the book in particular, and it's hard being somebody who covers politics and is just absolutely inundated in like the day to day of what's happening right now.
Mhm.
Um, there are a lot of attacks on like DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and there was one part that really jumped out at me, and I'm just gonna quote it here. Um, And it's this idea, well, why aren't you hiring experienced people? And the reality of what came before us was most of the experienced people were male and white. And
Mhm.
like that's a really interesting quote because it has like this default. And I wanted to ask you just from like your time digging into this, what was that true of the time? Cuz it doesn't like you immediately follow that up with like a paragraph of kind of like doesn't seem like it's true based on like data from contemporary times.
Yeah. I mean, in the early days of Twitch, a lot of the people that they were hiring were kind of coming out of the community. And, it was a very nerd, geek, gamer heavy crowd. And so, yeah, it was pretty self selecting for like a lot of people who were white and male, or in some cases for Twitch, like Asian and male. But regardless, it was a very male culture. You know, it I think there's a lot of parallels to be made here between Twitch and video game companies, where it like kind of developed a fratty vibe, admittedly a nerdy fratty vibe, but a lot of dudes hanging out together, and as a result, talking about women and people of other backgrounds in ways that were maybe not or that were perhaps ill advised, and that ended up kind of leading to a situation down the line where Twitch had like its own Me Too moment, essentially. Where like in 2020, a lot of people came out and said, yeah, behind the scenes, all of these things happened to various women that were not great. And some of those involved Twitch employees who wielded their power inappropriately and took advantage of streamers and things of that nature. And, you can definitely trace a line between that moment and the early days of Twitch where there just weren't many people who were not men as part of that company.
And like it's interesting because you also get some access to some of the original founders of Twitch,
Mhm.
and they kind of brush off the idea that they could have they say we could have done better, but also we really couldn't have done better. Maybe technology can help us one day to do even better, but it's just the nature of the beast. From what
Yeah.
you saw in your investigations and in your pursuing of this story, is that kind of an accurate thing where it's just like they couldn't have really talked with more employees or gotten better perspectives, or is it more like the system of, capitalism kind of nudging them away from doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think they definitely could have, done more on that front. I think every company can. They just don't prioritize it. It's also the double-edged sword of, again, hiring from this community that on one hand is very engaged, knows the platform really well, and like I think that Twitch wouldn't be what it is today if not for how community-oriented Twitch was in the early days and how often they listened to creators and they just hired creators outright, to help them build tools and come up with ideas to grow Twitch into something that would cater to those creators. But again, they were also selecting from this pool that was pretty white and pretty male. And that's going to lead to problems down the line. They definitely could have prioritized hiring outside of that kind of demographic, but they didn't. But it was also, a bunch of dudes in like their 20s making a company in Silicon Valley and in and around Silicon Valley. Like, that was the culture. That's what you were going to get. It's not good. It doesn't excuse it, but it does explain it.
Yeah, and one of the things you mentioned about Twitch's growth is like this period where they went from kind of that 20 something and then suddenly they started bringing in, older money, like,
Mhm.
40, 50-year olds who didn't really understand what the technology was, why anyone would spend their time watching it. And is that part of the shift? Is that has that kind of been completed by now? Is there kind of like this ongoing thing where a lot of the people who currently work there just don't fundamentally get the value of the platform?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much exactly what has happened. So basically, the start of it was, around the time that Amazon bought Twitch. Initially, Amazon let Twitch maintain kind of, autonomy, but even then, what they did is they still gave Twitch a lot of resources to scale up. And so suddenly you went from this company that was around 200 people to 400 people in the span of like a year. That's a lot. That invariably is going to at least begin to shift the foundations of a company. And from there, it just grew and grew. And so then they started bringing in people, especially executives, who are more traditional, like dyed in the wool Silicon Valley types, who had worked at other major companies and had this idea in mind of like, okay, well, we're going to turn this into something similar to a YouTube, or we're going to like take ideas that worked over here at this other social media platform and try to apply them to Twitch, even though it's a wholly different thing. And over time, as a result of that, and also just like people who founded the company, getting bored and wanting to move on, or like their stocks vest and they want to leave because they made a lot of money and they're tired of working. Like you have a revolving door effect. And, you know, after more than a decade of that, you end up with something that is fundamentally different than where you started. And in Twitch's case, it's a platform that doesn't really understand what creators value about it anymore, especially because, and this has been reiterated many times, Twitch is not profitable. It's not making Amazon money. It never really has. And while Amazon was okay with that for a while, they eventually came to collect, and they've been kind of in that mode for the past 4 or 5 years. And so as a result, the goal right now is not necessarily to grow Twitch in terms of audience or to add all these features that would, change the game and make everyone excited about it again. The goal first and foremost is to make money, is to turn it into something that can consistently make money, which explains all of the ads and, all of these things that people aren't really asking for, the changes to subscription splits. Amazon is just trying to figure out like where can we turn this thing into something that will actually generate profit as opposed to getting bigger but also becoming more expensive.
Yeah, because one of the things you mentioned fairly early on is this idea that like the larger Twitch gets, kind of the more expensive it becomes. Like you mentioned, they
Hmm.
stopped being profitable in like 2012. So
Yeah,
it's
before the
been,
Amazon acquisition.
yeah, it's been a long time. Do you think it's possible for Twitch to be profitable? Is that even like a possibility?
Man, uh, it's a good question. I think it's definitely a question that people within Amazon and Twitch are asking because, like, you know, as you mentioned, when any sort of streaming platform gets bigger, it becomes more expensive. It's just a simple matter of bandwidth. You know, you're serving more people, and streaming itself, not just viewing streaming, but especially the actual act of streaming, is really bandwidth heavy. You're just serving so much data. And so, how do you monetize that further? Right now, you know, Twitch and Amazon think it's ads. The problem with that is that ads are very they interrupt the viewing experience. And when the whole appeal of something is that it's live, that you want to catch these moments that are spontaneous, and that, like, if you look away you might miss it, like, and you might miss the coolest thing ever or the weirdest thing or something really funny. Then, like, a sudden 2-minute ad break in the middle of somebody's stream is not conducive to that at all. It is in fact really annoying and people hate it. So they're applying like a YouTube like playbook to a platform that is not like YouTube. And it hasn't worked so far. They're not profitable yet, as far as I know. Also, Twitch, in terms of the way that it handles ads, is nowhere near as sophisticated as YouTube. Like, say what you will about YouTube, it has a lot of problems. Its ad delivery network is like the most sophisticated on the planet. It tracks like everything about your viewing habits, and also just how many ads you've seen recently, and then decreases or increases them so that ideally you never get overwhelmed. You're always like, okay, yeah, there's an ad break here, but it was 5 seconds, so I don't give a shit. Back to the video. Whereas Twitch is just like all kind of manual. It's all like, it's somewhat at the streamer's discretion, but also not. And so again, sometimes you'll like click into somebody's stream, ad block for 90 seconds. Great. Okay. Love this. Yeah. And so I think that conventional wisdom, or at least wisdom among like Twitch streamers and people who used to work at Twitch, is that the company instead needs to be working, like, innovating on features that it already has that are more beneficial to streamers. So, like, increase streamers' ability to make money off of subscriptions and bits and things like that. Find alternative ways to incorporate those into the system so that you can take a cut of things that actually benefit streamers and don't detract from the viewing experience. But that's not the path that Twitch has chosen, at least for the moment.
Yeah, it seems like that approach would require people at the company who understand the product.
Well, also, it required people at the company. They've laid off so many people,
True.
and like everyone has worked to the bone at this point. Like the last time that I did a report um, toward the end of last year about kind of what it has been like under Dan Clancy in particular. And, one of the refrains that I heard from every employee I talked to is just like, there aren't enough people anymore. They've laid off almost 1,000 people. And so everyone who's still there is, doing 3 jobs, and most of them are looking for an exit.
And like that makes sense to me as like someone on the streaming end of it. I've been a partnered streamer for 2 years. I've never heard anything from Twitch. Like I've never talked with anyone from Twitch, never had an
Mm-hmm.
interaction with anyone from Twitch. It's very strange, especially considering some of the stories in this book where, it's talking about like the past relationships people at the company had with individual streamers, and it's like
Uh-huh.
I have I not even friendship wise, just like even cold calculating like person who's talking to me because it's their job. Like I've never had that interaction. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting to think about too, because when the partner program was first devised, Twitch was totally different. It was way, 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 way smaller. And so the idea behind the partner program at that time was to have these kind of one-on-one interactions, was to facilitate, streamers having partner managers who they could talk to if they had issues, or if they had ideas, or if they had, to make it so that Twitch could maintain a connection to its community that was beneficial for both sides. But as Twitch grew and incorporated more and more partners, went from having a couple hundred to thousands and then tens of thousands, that just became unsustainable. Like you would have to hire so many people to individually service every partner on the platform. And so I feel like partnership became kind of vestigial after a while. And it's still technically part of Twitch, but like, what is a partner really? Like, what do they do? What special access or programs do they get? What are the benefits? They don't really exist anymore.
Yeah, you talk about a number of these vestigial programs too. Like you talk about like this karaoke game that I've never heard of that apparently Twitch poured an
Oh man.
absurd amount of money into.
I remember so when they were rolling that out, it was like, in God, what was it, like 2016, 2017? It was like their big TwitchCon thing for that year. And so they had like a booth where you could go try it out. And I remember like going into, because they had erected just like the walls were made of office cubicle or something, like that kind of material. So you went into this tiny little claustrophobic room and sang Twitch karaoke to no one. It was so awkward. And like I love karaoke, and even I was like, oh my God, I feel so weird about this. But yeah, it was this weird initiative on their part. They decided to make a game where they had all this licensed music and you could sing on stream. That was the idea. That was the goal. It was very expensive to make because of all the licensing. Um, and it was one of many things that Twitch came up with that didn't serve any apparent need. Like nobody asked for this. I mean, there's a history of like streamers doing their own karaoke via YouTube and stuff, but not that many of them. It's not like it was this crazy huge trend that they were capitalizing on. It was just like an idea somebody had, and then they were like, well, Amazon is giving us money, so sure, let's try it. And then, of course, predictably, it didn't do well. It failed, and they discontinued it.
Yeah,
It was, yeah.
it, it's weird because again, like a lot of those initiatives that were tried, failed, and then just quietly shuffled off.
Mm-hmm.
It does indicate that this company does not really pay attention to what creators need. And that's also like as a through line through the book is just kind of like the fact that there's not really an easy way to make it on Twitch. Like there's not really a path for that if you're a creator. Like there's not like you mentioned numerous times. The odds are kind of stacked against you if you start streaming on Twitch. Like it's just kind of
Mm-hmm.
one of those um things where like the illusion is there that anyone can make it, but regardless of where you start, it's kind of a crapshoot.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and like Twitch, pretty famously has discoverability issues, or rather, no reliable mechanism of discoverability whatsoever. And that was a conversation for a long time where Twitch sort of said, like, yeah, we hear you and we're going to do something about it. In like, the late 2010s. That was like all the streamers were talking about it. Twitch was like, yep, we get it. We're going to try to build something better. And then, especially after 2020, they just sort of stopped. They're like, never mind, we're not going to fix that. Instead, we are going to outsource it to other platforms. We're going to say, okay, actually, because people have found success like going on TikTok, posting clips, and then telling people, hey, come back to my channel on Twitch. That's where that's where the good stuff happens. We're just going to lean into that. And so now they're rolling out, or they've rolled out all these tools to like help you make vertical video out of your streams and then just send it over to TikTok. But it's like, if you want to pull from the Twitch community, which I think you would want to on Twitch, like that's the appeal of Twitch, right? The main
Mhm.
selling point has always been this really unique community that like created all these things that are now memes across the internet. Um, like, it's where again, it's where the good stuff happens. Um, why would you instead want to build your community from like randos on TikTok who saw a 90-second clip and got curious? Like it doesn't really make a lot of sense if you go beyond the surface level. But again, it's what Twitch is doing now.
Well, it also seems like it would present a pretty significant vulnerability, and you kind of you talk about this later on in the book about streamers leaving for Kick or different platforms, and it seems like if you're not centralizing kind of your discoverability and your mechanisms, and you're outsourcing all of them, then there's not a ton to keep you from jumping ship if you get big enough. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think that what Twitch is relying on now is the fact that in this day and age, it behooves content creators to be everywhere. That like just because somebody jumps ship to YouTube, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to leave Twitch. These days, a lot of people multi-stream, and so as a result, like they can take that risk, and in fact, they can use that as a marketing tool. Again, they can be like, well, we have the best live streaming experience, which is probably true. And so if someone is streaming and they're multi-streaming, they'll probably mainly be interacting with their Twitch chat and doing things via Twitch. And so when viewers on other platforms catch wind of that, they're probably going to be like, well, maybe I should go watch them on Twitch. Maybe that's the best place to do this. But, again, I don't think that should be a reason not to improve your own offering, or to try to figure out better approaches to discoverability. And like, I think that a better funded, better staffed Twitch would be trying to do that. But I think that Amazon has cut them to the bone. And as a result, a lot of what they're doing now is just keeping the lights on.
Yeah, it's really fascinating too, because from kind of the picture you draw of what's going on with creators on Twitch,
Mhm.
it's pretty grim. Like, you talk a little bit about how the vast majority of people who make content on Twitch are doing it for like anywhere from like 5 to 0 people. Like a
Yeah.
shocking amount of people just stream to almost nobody.
Yeah. Which, like, if you're doing it for the love of the game, good for you. Like, you gotta applaud those people to some degree. Like, especially because there are so many people out there who've been doing it for years for like 5 viewers. Which is wild to think about, because if I was doing anything for 5 people for that long, I would probably just throw in the towel. Um, but at the same time, that is a sector of people that Twitch is making money off of. So you've always got to take that into consideration too. And then at that point, you have to wonder, like, why are they doing it? If it's like a fun hobby because they have a few friends who like to watch them play a video game, cool, great. If these people are trying to make it, if they've spent all this time trying to make it and received no reward for their effort, and then meanwhile Twitch is like running ads on their stuff and as a result making money, then that's pretty grim. That's not great.
Yeah, there's a really poignant part early on in the book where DJ Wheat, kind of towards the end of his section, talks about his son and how like his son is off streaming a game with his friends on Discord, and there's
Mhm.
like an element there where it's kind of like, if you're going to be streaming to 5 people, why allow a mega corporation to commodify it? Like,
Yeah,
why if you're doing it just for the thrill of the game, there are plenty of other platforms that allow you to do that without running ads on your content.
yeah. Perhaps at that point, instead of streaming big, you should stream small.
Oh, sequel. Um,
But yeah, and I think that, like, you know, it would not shock me if increasingly that's what a lot of people choose to do, because I think that social media at scale has kind of proven to be a failed experiment. Like, it makes us all unhappy, and we don't actually connect to each other, and everyone spreads misinformation. And you could argue that social media at scale is a major cause of the current collapse of the United States. Like, by most measures, aside from making a select few companies a lot of money, no one has benefited from this. Like, this sucks. We got to stop.
yeah,
And so I think there's a greater appeal, and there's a lesson to be learned from people who, yeah, are just like streaming games to a few friends on Discord, because that seems nice. It seems pleasant. It's much more similar to what people did back in the day of just like, you and a couple friends sit on the couch. One of you plays a single player game, the other talk shit the whole time. Like, awesome. Um, we don't need to monetize that interaction necessarily. We can just do it because it's fun.
yeah. It is. One of the other through lines of the book is just how this commodification of these online interactions, like, in some cases, like, physically destroys people. Like, there's
Hmm.
an entire section where you go into, and I'm probably going to pronounce her username wrong, Nega Oryx.
Yeah, you got it. That's
Um,
correct.
her entire rise to fame. I was aware of that clip that went viral that you
Mhm.
talk about, where in The Last of Us, like an arrow hits a bunny and she cries. I was aware of that, but
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of the entire story around it. And like, it's kind of insane how many how like a viral moment born out of like this moment of profound grief, and then like the subsequent grueling physical and mental gauntlet she kind of ran after that, that led her to breaking two of her own ribs.
Yep.
Like, that's, there's something really dystopian in that story, that where it's just like, in order to try and make it big in this business, so many people feel called upon to literally sacrifice their bodies in an effort to
Hmm.
try and make it to a point where it's just like a sustainable job.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, like, and I think that what's especially important to keep in mind about that particular chapter is that a lot of this was invisible pressure too. It's not like somebody from Twitch was tapping her on the shoulder and saying, stream for X number of hours per day, go to all these events, do this, do that. It was more that, she saw a particular roadmap that involved a lot of streaming and involved all these events to capitalize on sudden viral fame, on going from like, you know, 50 to 70 viewers to like overnight she jumped to like 1,000 or 2,000. And in that moment, not unjustifiably, she thought, if I don't really go for it, I'm going to lose all of this because, people are fickle, and like you've got to show that they deserve your viewership for better or worse. And Twitch has really monetized that, in that um, the entire platform is built around people functionally being live for as long as possible. Like the best way to catch new viewers on Twitch, aside from going outside the platform, is just to be present as often as possible. That was especially true in Twitch's earlier days when it was smaller, because there was just more of a chance that a random viewer would happen upon you. But that idea has persisted. This is why even now, like marathon streams, subathons are such a big thing.
Mhm.
Like, if you go live and stay live, there's just a better chance that an audience is going to find you, or a big moment's going to happen that will propel you to that next level. And, the thing about doing that is it's not good for you. Like, it is simply not good for you to sit in front of a computer all day long, on camera or off camera, even. I don't know if you've seen, like, there's one meme going around where it was like, study shows like 4 or more hours per video game has like negative health, or 4 or more hours of like sitting and playing a game has like a negative health impact. And somebody is like, yeah, but working at a desk job for 9 hours per day is great for you. Don't worry about it. Yeah. But yeah, doing all that stuff does take a toll over time, mentally and emotionally. And like, so the way that, that particular chapter ends is that she unsurprisingly gets really burnt out and like has to pull off of streaming, and needs to find like a new way to kind of to rediscover the joy that she used to derive from doing this. Because, you know, burnout I think that in this day and age, like burnout has been discussed more in the context of Twitch than it used to be. But I still think that a lot of people don't really know what burnout means. I think that you don't really understand it until you've experienced it. And like, it's not just oh, I'm gonna be tired for the next couple weeks and then I'll be back to normal. It's like, no, you can be burnt out in terms of not just your work, but your life. So everything is just gray and blah, and you don't really care about it anymore for years after like one really hard sprint. You got to be careful with that.
Yeah, it's, and the thing that you touch on is, and we've kind of been talking about a little bit here, is that all that pressure is systematized. They don't
Hmm.
need to have a person like behind you being like, you got to do it, because they've set up a system where you intuitively know that you have to do that. Like, most
Hmm.
streamers, I think, have some awareness that if they have that 13 seconds of fame, you know, they there's an opportunity there, and that opportunity isn't going to be around forever. And
Yeah, or
you
even
know
for long.
yeah, and like in the case of Nega Oryx, there's kind of like the silver lining at the end, where like she has pushed through that, and has, she's in many ways kind of scarred from the experience, but has reached a point of kind of financial stability where she's able to do more of the things that she likes
Mhm.
and is kind of able to recover. But you kind of allude to it a lot in the book, but that is not the case for the vast majority of people who attempt to do what she did. You know, there
Yeah.
for every story like that, there are 1,000 of someone who tried to do something similar and just never made it.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's most of them, right? Like most people don't make it. Um, Twitch especially is incredibly top heavy. Uh, like, and this is data from 2000 or 2021 because of like the Twitch leak, if anybody in chat is familiar with that. But using that data, understanding what people on Twitch make, people were able to figure out that not even everybody in the top 10,000 streamers on Twitch makes minimum wage from the platform. Um, and so, yeah, like, most of the people who are using it right now, who are streaming regularly, because I think Twitch's stat is that 7 million people go live every month.
Yep.
Um, yeah, a vanishingly small portion of those people is able to turn this into a living. Like a tiny, tiny, less than 0.01% or less than 0.1%. Um, and so, I think that again, if expectations are set clearly, if Twitch as a company was marketing itself as like, hey, come do this for fun, maybe you'll make some money, but probably not. Like, keep in mind that, if you're going to grind hard at this, it is unlikely that you're going to see any measure of real success. But they don't do that. Again, they sort of let these like implications, these systematized implications, carry the story of their platform. It's like, look at this. You can come here and play video games for a living. Amazing career. Best job you'll ever have. You'll never work a day in your life. And it's like, yeah, but no, that's simply not true.
Yeah, and I I don't know, like another aspect that I really appreciate is in the part of the book where you talk about Amaranth. Um
Hmm.
and you talk about kind of the history of cam girls.
Yeah.
There's like a portion in that section, and much like the DJ Wheat section from earlier, I just appreciate kind of this attention to overlooked portions of like the history of streaming because they're I have like a certain baseline knowledge of streaming history just because I was into those niches at the time.
Hmm.
But I've never read anyone actually write about those times and like these individuals who kind of push streaming ahead and like laid the foundation for what ultimately became like this $1 billion industry.
Yeah.
Um, yep. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I was very deliberate about that too, and just in terms of writing this book overall, because I think that especially a medium like live streaming, where everything happens in the moment, in the present, it's very easy for people to lose track of history. In part because like they're just on to the next thing the day after anything went down. Um, and on one hand, like I get it, the appeal is the moment, is spontaneity. But on the other hand, like that's not healthy because when people forget where they came from, then they tend to repeat mistakes. That's kind of the whole cycle of things. Um, and so I wanted to both give people context for where live streaming is a medium and where elements of it came from. In the case of the Amaranth chapter, a lot of what we consider live streaming now did start with like sex workers and with people adjacent to that. The first person to ever do something that we kind of now consider live streaming or akin to live streaming was a young woman in college who like had a webcam that it wasn't video because it wasn't sophisticated enough back then. This was like the late 90s. Um, but it would take pictures of her like every 15 seconds, and like that included her like being in her dorm having sex with people. um it's been there since the very 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 beginning, and so that's important to note because now you have a platform like Twitch that's benefiting from live streaming and everything that came before, and it's also like has historically been very kind of prone to cracking down on anything that even looks like sex work, or that even like just involves like especially women or people who are not men showing skin. It doesn't even have to be sexual in nature, and in fact often it isn't. That's been a topic of conversation a lot of times. Is like, if someone is not doing something in a sexual way, then why are we still calling this sexual content? Um, but yeah, I think it's important to keep that in mind. Like, sex workers built this shit, and then a company like Amazon is saying, "No, go away. We don't like you. We don't want you." Like, that sucks. That's terrible. Um, that's capitalism. Yeah.
Well, and I wanted to ask how much do you think is that at all related to kind of that tech broy culture that Twitch kind of came from like the Silicon Valley background? Is that kind of the root of where this anti anything that could even look like sex work thing comes from, or is it a capitalistic interest just wanting to make it all the content as palatable as possible? Because if it's the latter, if it's the second thing, like, it's interesting how much, and you touch on this multiple times throughout the book, but like how much edge lord stuff is tolerated, like how much
Hmm.
different figures who just get on to say racist things or try and toe the line get away with, if it is in fact
Yeah.
the second
Even
part.
now.
Yeah,
Even
even
now,
now.
Asmongold.
He's been doing Holocaust revisionism. It's
Ah,
insane.
great. Yeah, he really just keeps on pushing the limits. Um, but yeah, I think that it's both things, right? I think that definitely to your point, like, um, you can definitely trace a line between Twitch's early history and it being male dominated, and a lot of the early stars were kind of like edge lords, or like as DJ Wheat called them, like shock jocks or whatever, of that kind of lineage. But the capitalism part, the kind of like larger business story part, comes in that um, if you have any hint of like sex work on your or on your platform, a lot of payment processors will start looking at you as like, we're not going to accept payments from you anymore. Like, you
Mhm.
can't use our basic system to, like, spend money. So there's that element as well. There's definitely like the way that leads to trying to make everything palatable or PG or whatever, but only in particular ways. Because again, like, on one hand, you can't wear certain articles of clothing or like do things in like, you can have nudity in the case of body painting or something, but you can't have it in the case of like, wearing a swimsuit in certain environments. Like, these really fucking arbitrary metrics. But you can go say really fucking horrible things, like, Holocaust revisionism, um, in the presence of audiences that are impressionable. You know, uh, Twitch's demographics have shifted up over the years. Like, it is majority adults, right? But there are still a non-zero number of kids on the platform, and hearing that the Holocaust isn't real is not doing them any favors. Uh, so it remains like very arbitrary and at the discretion of Twitch in particular. And like, Twitch is of course adhering to lessons that it learned as a result of its early culture. Like, even though the company itself has changed a lot in terms of who works there and who runs the ship, like, there's still something that they're clinging to from the past, because they know that if they didn't, then a lot of people would get mad.
Yeah, it's interesting how a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut can be kind of cowardly
Oh,
when
tremendously. I mean,
it
every company is cowardly intrinsically.
yeah, it just the juxtaposition of power and cowardice sometimes just, I know it shouldn't. It just takes me by surprise.
Hmm.
Um and one of the more lighthearted things that you touch on in here is VTubing.
Yeah.
Um you have a quote in here that finally like explained VTubing to me in a way that I understand. And
Uh,
it's often compared to WWE kayfabe, where we're suspending disbelief to a certain degree to enjoy media in a way we wouldn't traditionally be able to do on normal Twitch streams.
mhm,
It's something cool about idol culture that I got to witness in Japan in person, where it's like, this is the character we'll be playing in this moment. And like,
mhm.
that finally made it click to me. Like the comparison between VTubers and WWE wrestlers didn't like that is not something I would have intuitively arrived to, but it makes complete sense now that it's laid out there. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Someone
and
needs to put together the VTuber versus WWE wrestler event. Have them get in the ring together and throw down.
I'd watch that. That'd be really fun.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's interesting. You provide so many different viewpoints into different types of streaming life that are absolutely fascinating. Like in the VTube section, you talk about a VTuber house and like the insane amount of equipment that they require, and
Mhm.
it's just interesting insofar as I've never outside of like game journalism circles, I haven't read a book like this that kind of focuses on this this corner of the culture that I think a lot of people have historically viewed as very disposable, you know,
Mm.
streams and stream content. And there's a point later on in the book where I can't remember who you quote, but is talking about how like so many of these moments just kind of are expected to wash away. Like,
Mhm.
you know, without like someone making it big, like you just have countless people having all of these incredibly human moments on their streams constantly, but so much of it just kind of flows away in time.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
oh,
And even like, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. Um, but you'll have like somebody, for example, or people will like post VODs of their best moments to YouTube and things like that. And Twitch to an extent preserves clips. But even then, like what just today they announced a limit on the number of like or the amount of storage that you can use for VODs and older clips. Um, and then let's say that somebody has uploaded their entire stream history to YouTube. Well, if they didn't have their stream or if they didn't have their chat on their stream like you do, but some people don't, if they didn't have it as part of their actual broadcast, then the chat is still lost. And so you
mhm.
have all of these completely decontextualized interactions. You have the streamer, referring to something or talking to somebody, and you have no idea what's happening. And if nobody preserved that, and then those clips are deleted from Twitch, it's just gone forever. And there's no way to access it. Like somebody asked me about this at the in-person launch event that I did over the weekend about the kind of dilemma of needing to be able to reference a lot of this material and then searching for it and being like, oh, it just doesn't exist. It's just gone. Nobody uploaded it, or the person who did upload it, like it was a tiny no-name YouTube channel, and they just decided to delete it, so that's gone now. Or like there's this Wikipedia that's full of, or this wiki that's full of holes. And yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard to like do any sort of historical project in this space because so much of what has happened, even though it's only happened over the course of like 15 years, uh, is already gone.
Yeah, like I was into esports back in the day, right? And
Mhm.
you talk a little about this with DJ Wheat, but like you get into this period of history where you know you're talking about like shoutcasting Quake 3 matches, and like it's like so much of that just doesn't exist anymore. Like
Mhm.
not only like did most of it never even make it onto YouTube, but like in some cases it kind of predated YouTube in for some of these things, or at least predated when these people even connected the idea that people on YouTube would want to watch it.
Mhm.
Um, and it's sad, but it also makes stuff like this even more important. These oral histories, and I know that a lot of people kind of think, well, everything's online these days, but websites, you know, come and go. You mentioned like I think like 3 or 4 different, streaming platforms that no longer exist anymore
Uh-huh.
in this book, and, like, all of the things that were streamed on them just gone. There's no way to
Yeah.
get them.
Yeah. And I mean, the internet, I think now especially, is in a state of degradation. Like, websites disappear every day, and like so much has been cannibalized by the several major platforms, which themselves just like, they are not good stewards of the content on them. They delete shit all the time. They maintain no record of any of sort of the context around those things. Uh, they're mostly centered on the present, and like, they can change their algorithms whenever they want to, such that certain things get deprioritized and effectively disappear. They're difficult to search by design. Like, all of this stuff that is even happening right now is disappearing as quickly as it appeared. So
It, it's
it's not, yeah,
it's weird to think about. It's weird, but I think that's what makes Stream Big so important, because it is
yeah,
something that it will not easily just disappear.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, I hope not. I mean, we got to see, we got to wait and see first what books the U.S. government chooses to burn.
that's true. Just
Aside from books
coincidentally,
about small freckled girls.
coincidentally, yesterday I learned that Amazon, parent company of Twitch,
Uh,
is removing the ability to download books to your Kindle. Like you'll no longer be able to download any of the digital books that you've bought through like their
oh
store.
yeah, this is like to stop you from using them on other services, right? It's just
Yeah,
like
or
it's to lock
devices.
you in.
Yep.
Yeah,
So this is your warning, folks. Go download your books, I guess.
yeah, yep. But yeah, because that's the thing is like, you know, it's so weird to think about. But there was a time when these major platforms like Facebook and Instagram and whatever else tried to be, or tried to at least pretend to be interoperable with each other and with other platforms. And now like every single one of them is closing ranks tighter and tighter. And they're like, yeah, if you look at Twitch and slash X, the everything app, like links have been so deprioritized that there's no point in sharing them. Like you will literally get no visibility. Um, Instagram, actually, let's see. Instagram won't even let you, at least on the mobile app, copy paste text
Yep.
into the body of a post, which is insane. Like they want you to do everything in their ecosystem. And with that, again, comes this abdication of responsibility for the rest of the internet. You're like, nope, we have our little fiefdom. And if you don't like it, then too bad. There's nowhere else to go.
Well, and of course, in the midst of all of that, they're attacking Internet Archive and trying to remove its ability to document anything.
Uh huh. And like things aren't looking good in court. I think they're going to probably succeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to be so hard to research the period of time we're in the future, maybe even 5 years from now. But again, that's why I really appreciate this. Um,
Yeah.
one thing I wanted to talk about is kind of in line with Nega Oryx's story and like the kind of the risks that streamers take at two different points in this book. You talk, you tell through the point of view of Cipher of Tyr
Hmm.
and Keffels about kind of this risk, personal risk that streamers take by making this content, by putting themselves out there, and by getting visibility. And it's kind of one of those things where, like, in the midst of just trying to make it, there is also like this other external factor of malicious actors trying to either ruin your reputation online or physically endanger you, whether it's by
Hmm.
stalking or um, violent threats or swatting. You talk about swatting at several different points through the book,
Hmm.
and it's it really is fascinating, right? Like, in part, you just have you have Cipher of Tyr,
Hmm.
who got just an insane wave of hatred for um basically just pointing out that, hey, it's not actually insane imposition on video game companies to animate women.
Right, right.
You guys have done that and can do that. Um, and that, like, earned her a wave of hatred that also, in a weird way, acted as, like, an opportunity window, for Cypher of Tyr to just, like, kind of gain this popularity, gain this, notoriety, while her message also resonated with folks.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, it's all good. Um, yeah, I mean, this is, I think in general, the it's the double-edged sword of content creation, and I think it's only become sharper over time, is this issue of, if you are a public figure, then there is a risk that people will come after you for something large or small, and you never really know quite what it might be. Like, especially these days, I think that, even what happened to Cypher of Tyr, to Tanya, that was such a different era in so many ways. I mean, the world of video games was just smaller back then. And so I think that in some ways, hate mobs were more organized and vicious, but in other ways, there wasn't one every day. There wasn't a new Gamergate every week. There wasn't a movement dedicated to, rooting out all perceived instances of DEI in games yet. Um, Now that's just Tuesday, which is so messed up.
Yeah.
That's like a predominant portion of gaming culture. Um, and these people are willing to make a lot of threats. They're willing to at least make your life miserable for a handful of days. It's kind of like I guess, the weird duality of how things have evolved over time is that back in the early days of online harassment around diversity in games, there would be an issue of like the month or the year, and people would just keep hammering on it and keep going after the same players over and over and over. And now, because it's like devolved into this of the week format, because the internet has made everyone's attention span so short, and because trolls get bored really fast, I guess one of the upsides is you can kind of just wait for them to go away. Like, if you don't engage with them that much, they will just sort of find someone else, which is fucked up in its own way. But you can at least be like, okay, well, they're gone now. Back to business as usual.
Yeah, and that kind of, like, moves us into the other section where you talk about, Keffals and,
Mhm.
like, w would it have been an option, like, in your estimation, to just, like, let it go away? Because that wasn't that long ago, right? Like, with Cypher of Tyr, it was 2014, I think?
Yeah. Yeah, that
Um
was the year of the Assassin's Creed animation controversy.
Oh god. Was that the same Assassin's Creed with, like, the glitch that just had, like, eyeballs and lips? Was it the same
I don't
one?
think so. I think
No.
that one maybe because that was the one set in England. I think that was a little bit before. I forget.
Yeah. Ah, whatever. But yeah, it's interesting because in response to the swatting, as opposed to just, like, kind of sitting back, letting it blow over, and then continuing about her business,
Mhm.
Keffels kinda tried to take the fight to the trolls. And
Yeah.
you kind of it gets labeled as, like, a victory, but then the story continues beyond that, where it's
Mhm.
a victory, but then, they continue finding hosting and it continues to pop back up. And, like, do you see there being an actual solution to, when we're talking about not just like a lone actor or, like, 10 people working together, but instead it's an entire website who's making it their job to ruin your life?
Yeah, I mean, the only real victory condition there, the only real way to dismantle something like that is, kind of to do what the like drop Kiwi Farms movement has tried to do, which is just to get everyone on every step of the path to kind of not do business with them anymore, to have all these providers refuse to host them and all these things, to essentially remove them from any sort of mainstream portion of the internet. Um, the real way to solve this problem would be for these various like hosts and web service providers uh, to just rigorously enforce terms of service that are dedicated to, avoiding harassment and other forms of terrible behavior. But they don't do that, and they wait until the last possible second to enforce their terms in a lot of cases, and even then only because of outside pressure. But that would be the real thing. Is just to say like, look here, these are clear instances of a platform being weaponized against people. This platform should probably not be allowed to exist on any sane portion of the web. But what we have right now also is like we live in a world where we have this extreme far right element that's been facilitated not just culturally but especially by capital. And so anytime that somebody gets pushed off or into the fringes or out of the mainstream, then there's this, entire sector waiting to embrace them with open arms. Say, okay, well, you can go cater to us. We've got your back. We like that you're horrible. We want to facilitate your cruelty. And so, like, I'm sure that even the if what the part of the internet that most people use mobilized against Kiwi Farms tomorrow and was like, yeah, you're done for, then there'd just be some new form of internet that people would make to ensure that it gets to continue doing its thing. It has already managed to stay on these like these sketchier kind of web hosting platforms. Um, that's just how it works, and it sucks. But like, I'm not sure that there's anything regular people can do. And like the book sort of points to this after a certain point, it becomes a matter of things like policy. Like those in power are supposed to be, regulating these platforms and protecting us, but they've abdicated that responsibility. And so what do we do? After then it becomes the duty of like in the case of the book, one random trans content creator and then a bunch of people who mobilize around her, or like a movement like Drop Kiwi Farms, which existed before Keffels. Um, but it shouldn't be those people's responsibility. And they probably, in the long run, can't win that battle. They can just sort of make progress in it or make life difficult for the people on Kiwi Farms.
And there's an interesting element and portion of that interaction. You describe an interaction with Keffels in the book, and I just wanted to ask you more about it. Where um, you approach her with like screenshots that show kind of some inconsistencies with
Mm-hmm.
her story, and I just kind of wanted to ask you more about that because I know that there are people watching who are curious and like what
Yeah.
your perspective is on all this.
Yeah. I mean, there ended up being like a lot of inconsistencies with, kind of some of the things that like Keffel said and did. Um, and that's not to take away from, what she went through, because
Yeah.
it's verifiably true that Kiwi Farms came after her, stalked her between multiple different countries, made her life hell for at least a few months. And that her activism resulted in Kiwi Farms like being taken off of the mainstream internet, at least for a little bit. Like those are important wins. That's good. Um, there was a lot of like speculation about kind of her GoFundMe. That was the big thing. Is like she collected all this money near when she was incarcerated, or when she was she was swatted and taken by the police for a little bit. They took some of her streaming equipment and the things that she needed to do her job, and so the GoFundMe was in part to counteract that, basically to say like, okay, well, I might need to buy new stuff, and during the time that I don't have my stuff, I'm losing out on potential income, which I need. Understandable, except for that she got a lot of that equipment back pretty immediately. And so then she said, okay, well, I'm going to put this toward a legal defense fund for the future, and also to seek kind of justice against the London Police Service, which had, treated her poorly, basically, is what she was contending. Um, and then there was this just very long period of time where nothing really came of that. And like she didn't really mount any sort of offense against the London Police Service. And people started to get antsy and they're like, where did this money go? What was the purpose of it? I did end up talking to like her lawyer, the person representing her in all of this. And like they did end up filing, a complaint against the London Police Service. So things happened. But there were also various other points where like she made different claims about what people did to her, and then kind of like walked them back or said, well, actually, it unfolded more like this. And, some of those cases, some of that involved the moment she was swatted. First, she said like that somebody held a gun to her head immediately. That's what she was greeted by. Then later, she was like, well, actually, they were at the door and my partner answered the door. It wasn't me. Um, and like, I think that Keffels is someone who, for the sake of conveying the feeling of a moment and the drama of it, exaggerates and gets her facts wrong. Um, like, she's definitely someone who, for better and worse, is like a natural content creator in that, like, she's very good at playing up the drama of something or leaning into the moment, or, she's very confrontational. And this is sort of what the chapter ends up kind of concluding on, is that you can be this sort of person who's perfect in some ways for like activism and content creation, and like you're ready to just throw down with people. But that same instinct can, in this scene, also lead to your downfall or destroy you, because it can convince you to become this incendiary personality who like starts shit with everybody and who is willing to sort of be a little bit dishonest for the sake of your larger argument. And then over time, that stops working and people start noticing, and it detracts credibility from you as a person and takes away from the things that you accomplished previously. And like, uh, Keffels, I think, still is not really online anymore. I don't think she's making content, because people came after her in droves. It got really nasty. People were making all these videos about her. Some of them were justified. Others were just super not. They were way out of pocket. Um, yeah, I mean, it was a really difficult situation. She also, ended up like going into rehab as a result of the pressure, or at least she said, the pressure from the Kiwi Farm stuff. Um, you know, so there was a drug usage component. Uh, she claims that she did not spend kind of the money from the GoFundMe on drugs. There was a quote in there where she's like, "What do I look like, Pablo Escobar? Like the amount of cocaine that you would be able to buy with all that money is absurd." Um, but yeah, I think that you know she was not a perfect, or she's not a perfect person. She was a troubled person in a lot of ways, and those qualities were exacerbated by content creation and the way that it incentivizes you to behave, and the way the platforms like Twitch incentivize you to behave. It's not to say that she's blameless. It's to say that the kind of person who's drawn to this can be, it can bring out their worst impulses.
Okay. Yeah, I was genuinely curious about your entire take from that.
I think I'm more sympathetic than most, while acknowledging that she fucked up in a lot of ways. And that, you know, especially early on when people started coming after her, I was like, I don't know, this feels kind of bad faith. And then as I looked into it myself more, and as I talked to her more, because I talked to her a bunch of the people in the book that I talked to, like I probably talked to her close to the most, both in terms of our first like sit down interview at TwitchCon, and then just in texts and messages and calls over the course of years. Um, and yeah, like I think that despite everything, she's someone who largely had good intentions, but really went astray toward the end there.
yeah. I appreciate your insight. I that was it's a fascinating portion of the book, to be sure, and that attention to the your interactions with her definitely come through and make that part of the book particularly engaging and interesting. So I'm thank you for sharing your insight there.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, with anything like this, so I think that on the internet, there's a tendency to be very black and white about things, to be like,
yeah,
this person is terrible, this person is the best, and so on. Which, comes from the fact that a lot of these conversations are happening in very brief messages, in drive by arguments, all of this stuff. And I think that if nothing else, a book allows you to be a lot more nuanced and to like, you don't necessarily have to reach a tidy conclusion. You can present the information as is and be like, all right, well, prospective reader, I hope you learned something and you can digest this for a while, and whatever you think is what you think. Best of luck.
well, I think at a few points you even talk about how none of these stories really have, you know, conclusions because they're all still unfolding, and that's absolutely true. I like A lot of these are just kind of glimpses into these very specific points of time, and um, in that way, I think it's actually more fascinating that a lot of these things are not wrapped up with a pretty bow at the end.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they can't be, right? Like these people keep doing their jobs, they keep streaming, they keep living lives. And so I wanted to, I signposted that at the start of the book. I'm like, these are just snapshots, snapshots of pivotal moments for sure. But I think there's a point where I say like by the time somebody's reading this, like these people will have had entire other arcs of their life and of their content creation careers happen. They may be in totally different places. Um, but I still wanted to sort of hone in on these moments that felt important because that context is still matters. It still helps you understand who somebody is. And especially I think that's true if like you're coming in and you start watching somebody like after the events in my book that you didn't watch before. Um, for better and worse, I think a lot of content creators, especially some of the more flawed ones, try to bury elements of their past. They'll just act like nothing ever happened. You have people like Destiny, for example, who's gone through many really fucked up arcs. And then he still gains new viewers on YouTube and they have no idea. And they're like, he seems credible. And it's like, I promise you he's not. Um, but like, there's that. It's like Dr. Disrespect now, who's back and remonetized on YouTube because I guess the punishment for
Oh God.
pedophilia is a 6-month demonetization. Um, yeah, all of these people who they sort of are able to get away with it because the internet just keeps moving and keeps going. And so if nothing else, it's important to kind of have these moments, I think, documented in a way where people can visit them and understand them holistically, as opposed to just picking them up in bits and pieces via like lore from other viewers who say, "Oh, did you hear about this thing? Well, blah blah blah," and then you have like 60 or like you have 1/60th of the story, and you still don't really know what actually happened. You're like, okay, well, I'm gonna keep watching them.
Exactly. Um, and to kind of close out your book, you have a section dedicated to politics on Twitch,
Hmm.
kind of the rise of like more politically minded content.
Yeah. You
And
you like politics? That's
I,
crazy.
a little bit, I dabble. Um, but one of the fascinating things you tell it through kind of the lens of Hassan Piker, and
Mhm.
um, how did you interview his mom? Like, you have a bunch of quotes in here
Mhm.
from his mother, and they're actually really sweet and really
Yeah.
insightful, and I really enjoyed them.
It is simply because so I went to his house to interview him, and his mom was staying with him, just hanging out. And so I was like, "Hey, can I talk to your mom too?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure, go for it." No, it's really funny because his mom is like so similar to him, but like how Hassan is kind of, um, especially when his chat is annoying him, he's kind of like a little bit grumpy and standoffish.
Mhm.
His mom is like that same personality, but like sunny and really just like happy. At least in that moment she was. And like also just a totally open book. So I
Ye
mean, like, for example, Hassan didn't want to talk, and like I understand this, but like he didn't want to talk about like swatting and stuff at all. And his mom was like, "Oh, I'll tell you everything. I was there one time and it happened, and I answered the door, and blah blah blah." Yeah.
Yeah, there's a quote that stood out to me, and it's just this part. Though Piker did the work of demonstrating all of this on Twitch, it's his mom, Sadef Piker, who puts it best. I can see there's a really smart new generation that's more aware of what's happening because it's their future that's been stolen from them. I think they need to be aware of it because political is personal. And like
Hmm.
that's so sweet, and it really does get at like kind of the essence of what I think resonates with political content on live streaming platforms and Twitch. Like,
Hmm.
I think that there is this growing acknowledgement that politics can't be this separate thing, and is in fact, incorporated and intertwined with all of our lives, what we do every day. And I think that there is, maybe people wouldn't be able to 100% put it in those same terms, but I think that there is kind of this rising gut awareness of that, and it's nice to see it, um, from someone who you wouldn't typically expect to have that kind of take.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's always good to hear it from someone who's a little bit older because
Yeah.
then you think, okay, well, they have not been like totally brain poisoned by conservative politics. Thank God. Um, but yeah, I mean, like, I think that's also just like, if nothing else, something that characterizes our current political moment on both sides of the divide is a broad understanding that something's wrong, that like things are not working as they should be. The system is no longer even attempting to support people, and that it needs to change. And like I think that in the last election, that was weaponized in a bad way, because you had the Democrats being like, we're gonna actually things are fine, status quo, blah blah blah, rules. And then you had the Republicans saying, and this was a lie, but saying like, we're gonna blow it up in a way that will benefit you, the normal person. Now they're blowing it up in a way that only benefits rich people, but that was the messaging they used to get into office. And unsurprisingly, it worked because people want to see this whole thing burn down because it's not working for them, demonstrably. So, on one hand, hearing something like that from Hassan's mom was like, it was surprising and it kind of crystallized the whole experience of talking to Hassan and his mom and other people in his life. Um, but I also think it wasn't that surprising just because, we're all kind of feeling it and we're being manipulated to feel it in different ways, some of which I think are constructive. The kind of work that Hassan does, the kind of work that other political streamers on Twitch do, including yourself. I think that helps people channel this feeling, increasingly this feeling of anger into, at least understanding what's happening and hopefully going out into their own communities and beginning to solve these problems. Um, but it's also being channeled in these really destructive ways that currently have, given the Republican Party every major seat of government.
Yeah, that is, I think, one of the interesting, because like the entire book isn't necessarily about, explicitly political creators, but throughout all of it, there is kind of the through line of, or that tension that is kind
Mhm.
of, that kind of coalesces in that chapter, of like, these people are not operating in a vacuum, and Hassan is doing his best to articulate to a bunch of people who lack that articulation kind of these wider problems, and
Mhm.
is in turn being used as a platform for folks like AOC. You talk about that in the section. But similarly, there is kind of this undercurrent of, the how the edge lords, similarly to how like Nega Oryx can
Mhm.
kind of intuit the capitalistic systemic constraint of her situation. I think
Mhm.
that similarly, there's like a through line there of these edge lord folks who, were just edgy posting 12 years ago, but who have, cultivated communities who then give rise to additional figures. And then they've kind of evolved in a very different direction, um, to shape some of this landscape. And it's interesting because again, you don't put a pretty bow on it. Like
Yeah,
what
good thing too, because a lot changed in the past like year or so. It's so funny because the like AOC portion of the Hassan chapter in particular, kind of ruminates a little bit on why like more politicians haven't entered the space or used it.
Mhm.
And I think it's still correct in some ways, in that like, you don't see any politicians with their own bespoke Twitch channels or their own Kick channels, like, streaming day in and day out and kind of trying to cultivate an audience that way. But I still feel like I wanted to write like take those pages and write like never mind on them because of what happened last year in the election, because of
Mhm.
like Trump streaming with Aiden Ross and everything.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, now they're doing it. Now they're doing it in some capacity. And unfortunately the book was finished by then. So I just watched that and I was like, oh, okay, well, fine. Let's just get this over with.
Yeah. What would you kind of want to leave readers or folks listening to this? What's kind of your, because if you can't put a bow on it,
Mhm.
what kind of wrap up can you kind of give the book?
Yeah, I mean, what I tried to point to in like the epilogue or whatever you want to call it, the after, I don't know what the technical term is this idea of like, because what I wanted the through line to be is the way that platforms shape people and people shape platforms. And Twitch in particular, its early goings were very much shaped by the people who used it. Again, like the company hired people straight out of the community. They took feature suggestions from streamers and applied them. For example, like this is the subscribe button on
Hmm.
the side of your screen, essential to the entire Twitch economy, to creators being able to make money. That was the suggestion of Sean Day9 Plot, who is a streamer and host and former esports guy. That was his idea. He said there should be a button and people can press it and give me $5. And Twitch was like, yeah, there should. And they made it for him specifically, and then later for other people. And now it's baked into the platform. Um, but there were those early days when Twitch was very much that, and now it's kind of night and day. Now Twitch is very far removed from a lot of its creators, especially just like regular smaller ones. But what I wanted to kind of end on was this idea that the community is still the thing that drives Twitch. It is still the beating heart of the platform. If that community left tomorrow, then that'd be it. Twitch would be done. There'd be no resuscitating it. And so even as Twitch as a company moves further and further away from its community and more toward this profit motive, this kind of frantic profit motive, because they just need to make money at all costs, apparently to appease Amazon at this point, it's still a platform by creators, if not necessarily for them. Like they are still the ones who are making it work. They're still the ones that are drawing people here. And the culture that they've created now exists across other platforms too. People make references to things that happen on Twitch, both very explicitly in terms of like, here's a video about what so and so said. Oh, I'm going to react to it. Or just like, people on other platforms say "pog," like that's a Twitch word that belongs to Twitch. Um, all of that, like that culture will persist even if Twitch goes belly up tomorrow. And I think that's the happy-ish ending that I wanted to give the story.
Well, Nathan Grayson, reporter and co-founder of Aftermath, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for Stream Big. Um, I think that's a lovely way to wrap things up.
Hell yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
Again,
of
it
course.
was awesome.
Uh,
And I had a great time, and thank you to everybody in chat who listened to the conversation. You made some great comments that I didn't really get to, but I appreciated them.
and I know that we went a bit longer, but I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And just for to remind people, the name of the book is Stream Big: The Triumphs and Turmoils of Twitch and the Stars Behind the Screen. You can get it wherever books are sold, in store and like on Amazon and stuff. I don't know if anyone wants to drop a link into chat or if I can do that without chat saying you're not allowed.
You can drop it in the Discord to me, and I'll throw it in all the
Okay,
chats.
fantastic. I will do that right now. And then let's see other plugs, because why not? There is an audiobook that you can access on Spotify and places like that. It's got a guy with a cool voice. It's not me, it's some other guy. Um, and then also, if you enjoy video game news with a healthy dose of politics, um, you should go to aftermath.site, which is the website that me and some friends of mine started. It is worker owned, so we have no executives, making bullshit, stupid decisions, and it's fully reader supported. So it's just subscribers who are keeping us afloat. Check it out. I think we do good work, and if you like it, consider sticking around and subscribing.
And I will co-sign Aftermath. Excellent website, excellent coverage, excellent content.
Hell yeah. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Nathan. See ya.
Yeah. Bye.
That was so fun. I'm so happy for him. I'm so happy that this book came out. That was so fun.